So, we're back. We are talking about protein this week and how much you really need to build muscle. Throughout the years, you would have seen the same sources, same videos that I would have done preaching that you need 0.5 gram per pound of body weight. You need 2 grams per pound of body weight. And often, because it's such a talked about topic, it's a case of who shouts the loudest, who gets their voice heard. But what we're going to do today is just dive into some of those numbers. The research has been there all along, and you're going to learn exactly how much protein you need. For those of you joining for the first time, I am Tom, and I am obsessed with everything that lies under the broad umbrella of longevity. Now, the reason I'm putting this channel together and these videos together is so that I can share the information that I'm learning when it comes around to these topics so that we can both improve our lives in a way that's sustainable, that doesn't have us make sacrifices that we don't want to make, and those small changes that we do make add up, and in a few years' time, we're a totally different person to the people we are today. Let's tackle a big question up front. How much protein do we actually need? Up until last year, I was under the impression that I needed 1 gram per pound of body weight, which for my weight puts me at around 180 grams a day. I've also just listened to a podcast produced by Zoe, and they recommended around 0.6 grams per kilo. So 2 very different guesses there, but let's dive into exactly how much we need. A 2017 meta-analysis of 49 studies and around 2,000 participants did find that dietary protein supplementation, especially in those individuals who are resistance trained, did lead to increases in strength, measured as 1 rep max, and then also muscle size, measured as the cross-sectional area of the muscle fibers. Beyond 1.6 grams per kilo or 0.7 grams per pound, there were found to be no additional benefits in the gain of fat-free mass. The results of this study were closely replicated by a study a few years later in 2022 looking at strength gains. And this study found that the strength gains were maximized at around 1.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. The main findings of this paper being that muscle strength cannot be increased by protein supplementation alone. You need resistance training in there as well. With resistance training, muscle strength increases at a rate of 0.72% per 0.1 grams of body weight per day, up to 1.5 grams per kilogram per day. No further gains are achieved thereafter. The thing that I really took away from this new figure of 0.7 grams per pound was, for the large part, additional supplementation through store-bought bars and shakes is quite unnecessary. If you have even a half-decent grasp of diet and how much protein is in your food, you can get all of that from natural sources. So this calculation puts me at around 130 grams per day for doing 0.7 grams per pound. That's totally achievable from my normal diet, maybe with 1 extra scoop of protein a day. When we talk about protein distribution, it's been debunked numerous times that you can only absorb 20 grams of protein per meal. You can actually absorb infinite amounts of protein per meal. You'd really have to be doing some sort of insane food challenge to find that upper limit. What this comes from is a misunderstanding, and this misunderstanding is focused around the metabolism of this protein, because there is an upper limit for the amount of muscle protein synthesis the body can stimulate after 1 meal. When protein enters the body, it has to be digested, and this is where it's broken down into pieces that the body can then absorb. However, the metabolism of this protein is different. The metabolism of this protein refers to how much we can actually use, primarily for muscle protein synthesis, which is the process by which our muscles grow. In resting conditions, when you're fed, 20 grams of protein does seem to maximize the level of muscle protein synthesis that we can stimulate due to something that researchers call the muscle full effect. This is because muscle protein synthesis is a very energy intensive process, and the body doesn't have to be continuously building muscle because this is a huge caloric requirement. As you'd expect, there are factors that would affect this 20 gram limit because these results were taken from people at rest or after low intensity exercise. When we look at research that will cover more substantial and in particular full body training, this really expands the upper limit to around 40 grams that we can use for muscle protein synthesis. This also plays into the fact that there is a perceived anabolic window of usually around an hour or 2 after a workout, in which if you consume that protein, then you'll maximize the benefits of that workout. While exercise does make the muscle more sensitive to the anabolic response to food intake, and you do see a greater benefit if protein is consumed post-workout, this refers to around a 5 to 6 hour window and not the 1 hour window that was perceived in the past. An interesting point to raise here is that your response to breakfast, lunch, and possibly dinner the next day is raised past this 20 gram limit. And so one of the ways in which we can reliably increase muscle protein synthesis is through consistent exercise. When it comes down to protein timing and muscle protein synthesis, think of it like this. When you finish your workout, you have 100 units of response. And so while the timing of your meal won't impact the total level of response that you will have, it'll just impact when that response will occur. For example, if you have a protein shake directly after the gym, a greater proportion of that 100 units will be used then, and this will leave less to be distributed over the following meals. On the contrary, if you don't have that protein shake, this leaves more to be distributed over the following meals, so you are still using all of it. There are a couple of genetic responses here as well, one of which being natural testosterone levels and the other being the MTSN gene. This produces myostatin, which is a protein that limits muscle growth. There are also body composition genes that will come into play here to determine things like bone density, fat distribution, and fat mass. I will go into this in another video as I went down a bit of a rabbit hole here. Dr. Luc van Loon is a figure that seems to pop up a lot in this niche, so I'll do some looking into him. Fasting is another caveat to this upper limit. After a fasted period, the body has a greater need for muscle protein synthesis than it did before. Evolutionarily, this does make a lot of sense. If you were born 10,000 years ago and your tribe have spent a day or two chasing down this animal for you to eat, when you finally get hold of that protein, the body will want to maximize the level of muscle protein synthesis that you can stimulate to use that protein to replenish the muscle that you've lost chasing that down. There's also the impact of muscle protein breakdown and how this changes with the amount of protein consumed. For this, I really recommend checking out Menno Henselmanns' video on this, as my efforts to explain it have been absolutely abysmal and will definitely not make it into the final cut. Like me, you've probably wondered what happens to this excess protein. So let's say we consume 60 grams post-workout and it's a very intense full body workout. So let's say we use that upper limit, 40 grams. What happens to this extra 20 grams that we consume? The body can't store this extra protein as muscle, and so it's used for one of two things. Either it's broken down and used for energy, or it's stored as fat, with the excess amino acids being excreted. Moving from quality onto quantity now, and this is such an overlooked variable, and I think the reason why I'm looking at this is because I wanted to answer the question myself, is this an important one? The short answer is yes. Protein quality determines how efficiently you can utilize the amino acids from this protein. By focusing on high quality protein sources, you'll gain a ton more nutritional benefits. And the way to determine high quality versus low quality protein really comes down to the amino acid content, digestibility, and bioavailability. One conversation that has been had on repeat for decades is this conversation around animal sources versus vegetable sources. The key differential that I can find is around the completeness of these proteins, which refers to the quantity of amino acids they contain. Typically, all dietary animal protein is seen as complete because they contain all the essential amino acids that you need, whereas vegetable proteins lack one or two and so are seen as incomplete on the whole. Now, this doesn't mean that vegetable proteins are worse than animal proteins. This just means that if you want to hit that protein goal while foregoing animal sources, you need to consume a greater variety to make sure you get all those essential amino acids. Although animal protein consumption has been linked to high cholesterol and saturated fat levels, there are a number of studies that have demonstrated positive benefits for different demographics, such as the elderly and pregnant women. I'll link those down below. Whey protein is widely hailed as the most complete and highest quality protein source around, and it denotes from the translucent liquid part of milk that is left over after the process of cheese manufacturing. From this liquid, the whey proteins are then separated and purified using different techniques, leading to different concentrations of whey protein. Now, I didn't know there were different types of whey protein, but this paper, published in 2003, breaks it down fantastically. Actually, the reason why I stopped taking whey protein, like 5-6 years ago now, was because of the adverse effects that I thought it was having on my acne and on my skin. But looking at this table, I can probably see that this is because I was taking the wrong source of whey protein, and what I need to be looking at is the whey protein isolate, which doesn't have the same quantity of lactose. Looking at whey isolate, this would provide someone with all the essential amino acids that they need, while offering a very low lactose concentration, and so it could be perfect for someone who's lactose intolerant. Of the three types of whey shown below, you can see that whey isolate is the purest form of protein because it has the most significant removal of fat and lactose during that manufacturing process. Although the concentration of protein is the highest in the isolate form, this will often include a lot of denatured proteins, and that is those that have been broken down by the manufacturing process and have lost those peptide bonds, thus making them less effective. This is not to say that the other types of whey protein are completely useless. Due to its high lactose concentration, in fact, whey protein has a number of different applications within the food industry, being used for baked goods, snacks, and confectionery. The other type of protein I wanted to cover was soy, because this is the protein that I consume most regularly. Now, soy used to be considered a much more incomplete protein using the PER, or protein efficiency ratio. And this came from measuring the weight gain in rats that were fed a particular supplement. However, when we test using the protein digestibility corrected amino acid scale and test for the concentration of different amino acids, we find a score pretty much on par with animal protein of 1, which is the highest score available. This makes soy a complete protein. There are also many health benefits that have been associated with the consumption of soy protein, such as lower blood pressure and increased LDL cholesterol oxidation. However, there does have to be more research carried out for these to be taken as gospel. Similar to whey protein, there are 3 types of soy protein that you can see below. Soy concentrate is made from defatted soybeans, and it's most commonly used in nutrition bars, cereals, and yogurts because its low carbohydrate content makes it so much more palatable than soy flour. Isolate is again the most refined protein source, but contains no dietary fiber. Its digestibility makes it a key ingredient in sports drinks and infant formulas. One relationship that I wanted to explore in particular with this video was the relationship between a high protein diet and all-cause mortality over time. For this, we're going to use a 2020 meta-analysis, and a key factor across all these studies within was this conversation between plant and animal protein. The main study in this meta-analysis was the Rotterdam study, which was a population-based cohort in the Netherlands looking at 7,800 people between the ages of 55 and 71 over a 13-year time span. The main finding was that there was an association between high protein intake and all-cause mortality, mainly driven by the high animal protein intake and its link to cardiovascular disease. Plant protein intake was interestingly not associated with increasing the risk of all-cause mortality at all, showing that it was specifically this link between animal-based protein and cardiovascular disease which was the root of this association. Further study into higher plant-based protein diets actually could show that it could decrease the risk of all-cause mortality. Now, when controlling geographically, the link between cardiovascular disease mortality and protein intake looked to be a lot worse in North American and European populations where the main animal protein sources were red and processed meat, as opposed to Japan where animal protein was lower and the main source was fish. The Rotterdam study built on this and further supported that this harmful association between high animal-based protein diets and cardiovascular disease mortality was born from red meat and dairy and not from protein from fish and eggs. The main takeaway of this study for me was that it's important to replace animal-based protein with plant-based protein from time to time to decrease your risk of cardiovascular disease and your risk of all-cause mortality. One thing to keep in mind is the age of the participants, and one limitation of this study could be the evolution of our protein needs as we age. As such, I think there needs to be more research done on younger population sizes to see if these relationships and these findings ring true across the board. The reason why I mention this is because from the age of around 30, we start to lose between 3 and 5% of our muscle mass per decade. As such, the recommended protein intake that we need increases with age to retain this muscle mass, alongside regular strength training, of course. There have also been studies to show the adverse effects of a high protein diet on kidney function, namely the formation of uric acid and calcium kidney stones. A 2013 paper found again that the increased consumption of red meat as part of a high protein diet did increase the risk of cancer. When examining the multivariate odds ratios for those eating red meat 7 or more times a week relative to those eating it 3 or fewer times per week, the results were 1.6 for stomach cancer, 1.9 for colon cancer, 1.7 for rectal cancer, 1.6 for pancreatic cancer and bladder cancer, 1.2 for breast cancer, 1.5 for endometrial cancer, and 1.3 for ovarian cancer. These odds ratios are used to compare the odds of occurrence of the outcome of interest, which in this case is cancer. Therefore, a diet high in red meat does increase the risk of cancer across the board, with huge jumps in the occurrence of rectal and colon cancer. The evidence seems to be split on whether a high protein diet is beneficial for brain health, mainly due to the increase in production it causes in ammonia, which, if that overloads the liver, can lead to neurological disorders. So while high protein diets can be beneficial for weight management and for maintaining energy levels throughout the day, I'd really consider about where you're getting these protein sources from, as high quantities of red meat can lead to health complications later on in life. So there we have it. Now we know how much protein to get per day, how roughly to distribute this in line with muscle protein synthesis, and the best sources in order to avoid those long-term health complications. I will definitely be checking back in on this periodically just to see where the research is going, especially with regards to brain health. But one thing that I will do straight off the bat is analyze my diet and see where I can make those swaps to plant-based protein. I do recommend doing a short inventory of your new daily protein intake just to see, number one, if you are over-consuming, and number two, where you yourself can make those plant-based swaps. Catch you next time.